25 years ago today, the Maastricht Treaty was signed, and with it the European Union came into existence. Then there were just 12 states belonging to the European Union, and it provided a blueprint for economic and monetary union. Norman Lamont was the Chancellor at the time, negotiating Britain's opt-out from the euro, and he joins me now. Very cold it was. I think it's so cold that John Simpson of the BBC said he forgot your name. But
what about the signature?
No. He was on air and he said the Chancellor of Exchequer, whose name I've forgotten because I'm so cold.
No, I don't remember that.
You don't remember that. Anyway, you were very much reluctant, weren't you, compared to John Major and the then Foreign Secretary Douglas Hurd about the whole process?
Well, I refused to sign it. I did not go to the signing ceremony, and the signature on the treaty is not mine. It was another minister who very kindly volunteered to go when he heard me ranting in the Treasury about how I didn't want to sign it. I had negotiated our non-participation in the euro, our opt-out. It was the most miserable year of my life, talking to my opposite numbers, saying I didn't think this idea of the single currency would work and that Britain would not join, which they refused to believe. They kept thinking in the end one would cave in. But as I say, I was the formal negotiator for the opt-out, but I hated the whole treaty, not just I mean, we were exempt from...
And you were actually having rows behind the scenes with John Major and Douglas Hurd about it.
Well, I'm not sure I had rows because I was negotiating our non-participation, but I didn't like the whole drift of the treaty, which I saw as leading to further integration in Europe.
You managed to keep Britain out of formally being committed to the European exchange rate mechanism, but
to the single currency.
No, but also the exchange rate mechanism, because they wanted to sign everyone up in advance. However, we were still in. And, of course, what happened a few months later was Black Wednesday.
Well, it's very clever of you to remember that. You're right. While we were in the ERM, eventually we were pushed out, but while we were in the ERM, which we'd chosen to do voluntarily, there was a provision in the draft Maastricht Treaty that we should be compelled to be members. And I did argue, you're quite right, I did have a bit of an argument with John Major and Douglas Hurd, because I said, I don't want this to be compulsory. One day we might decide we don't want to be. And their attitude was, we're in, so what on earth are you worked up about?
My question...
But let me finish. And I said, well, one day we might wish to leave, and I don't think we should be compelled to join. And it was a good thing that I just ignored them and went on, because we were forced out. But theoretically, if the Maastricht Treaty had been as originally designed, we'd have been forced back in again.
Well, my question is, perhaps with hindsight, do you think at that point, once you had that opt-out, if you like, you should have said we should get out?
Well, I did say that to John.
No, get out now and avoid Black Wednesday.
Well, I did say that before Black Wednesday occurred. I mean, it's a matter of record in a book I've written about it, that I twice actually suggested to John Major perhaps we should reconsider our membership. At the time, I argued this not because I foresaw what was going to happen, but because interest rates I felt were too high, and I felt the ERM had actually been useful in getting inflation down, but I felt it had done all the good work it could do, and it would be better if we got out. And he decided no, and I accepted that. I mean, I accept the responsibility. I accepted his decision.
Do you think, again with hindsight, that actually that's the moment that we should have had the referendum? That it was quite clear Europe was going in one way, we were getting opt-outs on the other, and the choice should be, do we want to go with Europe or do we want to get out?
Well, John Major did promise a referendum on the euro if we were ever to decide to join it. I don't think in the rest of the treaty there was quite enough really to join, to justify a referendum.
I mean, there was this idea of the European Union,
the name
signed up to ever closer
union.
The
name change was there, but security policy, foreign policy was still on an intergovernmental basis. We had an opt-out, not just from the single currency, but also from the social chapter as well. So I don't actually think in the guts of the rest of the treaty. I mean, there was some stuff about citizenship, and which I didn't really...
I mean, what I'm saying is, at the time, 25 years ago, you weren't privately thinking, actually, we'd be better off out of this.
Oh, that thought did cross my mind, and I think it was while I was Chancellor that the thought occurred to me when I was looking at the trade statistics for countries like Switzerland, and I was so struck by the fact that Switzerland exported more per capita to the EU than we did, and had much more integration with the EU than we did economically, and yet was not a member of the European Union, or the EC as it was then called. And I did actually, a couple of years after I left the government, I think it was 94 or 95, I did actually make a speech saying that I had become convinced that there was, I was very careful how I put it, I said there is no unambiguous advantage to us from being in the European Union.
The one thing you were clearly wrong on was the euro, weren't you? Because, I mean, it has got off the ground, it's still viable, it's still got 19 members.
Yeah, but it's hardly working. I mean, I would say it's been I would say that's the one thing, not just I, but lots of people have been right about. I think the euro has been a failure in the sense that I think it has inflicted massive suffering and very low growth on certain southern countries in Europe. It has been, I wouldn't go along with everything that the Americans have been saying about it, but you know, it's been very beneficial to Germany. I don't think it functions well. And
what do you mean you don't go along with Donald Trump saying Germany is a currency manipulator?
Well, I don't think Germany designedly put the euro in a position that it would help them, but it actually has been a huge benefit to them.
And a big mistake, you think, for Europe as a whole?
I think it is a historic mistake.
And how long do you think it will last?
Well, I've never predicted the near end of it, and lots of people have. And I remember way back in the 90s, I said, well, currency unions between independent states normally last 30, 40 years, then they gradually disintegrate. I think I'll still stick with that.
Okay, and what about John Bercow? Was he right to criticise Donald Trump?
I think John Bercow, who I know and like, is a bit of a friend of mine, I think he's made a terrible error. I think he's overreaching himself. It is not for him, I think, to decide. It is for the House of Commons and the government to decide. This affects the national interest. He is really making a judgment about the national interest, interfering with the government's judgment on it. The role of the Speaker of the House of Commons, as Speaker Lentor said, is, I have no eyes and ears except as a servant of this House, and he should not presume. I think he's gone too far.
Lamont, thank you very much indeed.